One. Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Kageyama, and I'd like to welcome everyone here to Be Your Own Hero. I'm a stage 4 prostate, bone, and lung cancer patient slash survivor. Been dealing with cancer since late 2020, early 2021, doing very well. And I have a very wonderful special guest today. Uh, what I'd like to do is ask each and every one of you that are watching if you could make a comment in the comments section, subscribe, like, and ring the notification bell so you can get these videos every week. I post them every Monday. And yeah, let's get to it. I am so excited to have my special guest, and her name is Lori Williams. And Lori, please introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about who you are, and we're going to get into a great conversation.
Mark, thank you so much for having me on your show. I'm honored to be here. Yes, my name is Lori Lambert Williams, and I am an author and a teacher. And I teach a unique technique that was developed for U.S. military intelligence back during the Cold War called controlled remote viewing. And I have an online business called Intuitive Specialists. And so that's kind of my thing. But I'm also the wife of a cancer survivor. My husband Jim had stage 2 prostate cancer and was diagnosed with it in his mid 50s back in 2010. He is now 73 and thriving and doing really, really well. And he was also diagnosed about 13, 14 months ago with stage 4 rectal cancer. Had to have surgery, but actually turned out was not malignant. It was a big, huge thing, caused some surgery, but he is also doing great. And it's always caused us to be on a very deep healing journey that is both spiritual and natural in the sense of really having, natural, healthy eating nutritional food and avoiding processed foods to a certain degree. Every now and then, we have some processed foods, but we're definitely not fanatical, but we do try to avoid processed foods as much as possible. And my father also passed away in 2004 of pancreatic cancer. And after, not a really lengthy illness, I think about a 2-year illness with that. So when they diagnosed it, when they first caught it, they were like, "Oh, you're already, past the point of us being able to do anything to help you." And so that was an interesting journey to go through as well with my dad and my mom. So I'm just here to talk with you about that experience, those experiences, and how that affected our lives.
Yeah, I mean, people, until you actually go through it, you don't realize how, what a wide net cancer spreads over the people that, your family, your loved ones, your friends. I mean, I have learned so much through my own personal cancer journey and how complex it gets and how many different things as a cancer patient that you have to navigate. And so why don't we start there? What are your thoughts on that?
It is overwhelming. First of all, I had never until Jim. Well, when Jim got diagnosed, I had already been through the thing with my parents because it was kind of an interesting situation. Back in, I guess it was 2002 or 2003. I was driving down a busy street in Amarillo, Texas, and suddenly in my head, I hear a voice say, "Call your mother right now." So I pull off into a parking lot, called my mother, and she answered the phone and she was sobbing. And I said, "Mom, what's happening?" And she said, "I can't tell you. I can't tell you." I said, "You have to tell me." She said, "No, no, we're not supposed to tell. We're not supposed to tell you." I said, "Mom, God just told me to pull off the street and call you, so you're supposed to tell me." And she goes, "Oh, you and that damned ESP." And then so she told me that my dad had just gotten diagnosed with terminal stage 4 pancreatic cancer. And my dad was like, don't tell the kids until we find out all the details, because they'd just gotten the diagnosis. And she had been in the hospital with him for hours, after the diagnosis, and had just come home to change clothes or something when I called. So he had given her the order, don't tell the kids. So she wasn't supposed to say anything. But after, and so they were very adamant that they wanted to handle it their own way. They didn't want a ton of, my dad didn't want a bunch of, you know, excessive reactions. But to please my mother, he went ahead and did some chemo, even though the doctor said it's not going to help. You're too far gone. And he really was ready to go. He had suffered from depression for a long time, and for him, it was kind of like, "Phew, finally a way out. I'm going to leave this body and move on." And so he didn't want any heroics done. But my mother, of course, was just beside herself and distraught. So he said, "Okay, okay, we'll do some chemo." But he was already nearing 80. And so they didn't want to do a big invasive surgery. They said, "We don't think it's going to help. You probably won't even survive it." And so I was adamant with my mom, "We're not doing surgery. The most I'll do is I'll do some chemo," which, made him pretty miserable. He didn't like the chemo, but he did a little bit of it just to appease her. And so my mom's way of reacting
Let me pause
was,
you right there because, what I've found when somebody else wants you to do something, it's not, when you're trying to appease somebody, it's in my opinion, and you could address this, it's got to come from you. You've got to want it, more than anything yourself. Instead
"Mm,
of, if you can combine it with, because my thing was when I got diagnosed with stage 4 prostate bone and lung cancer, and my doctor said, your cancer's so bad I can't cure you. Uh, I took the approach that dying was not an option. You know, dying, it's not going to happen. So I'm going to live. I just have to figure out how to do it. And I think that's an important thing to realize in any health crisis situation. It's got to come from the person who's going through it, not somebody else saying you need to do this. What are your thoughts on that?
I agree with you so much, because we have had a number of big health crises. And one thing that I found really irritating, and I think I've probably been guilty of this when I was younger, is suddenly everybody in the world becomes an expert and wants to tell you how to heal yourself. Right? Oh, you've got to do this. You've got to drink Essiac tea. Oh, you've got to use this method. You've got to do this thing. And it becomes overwhelming when you don't want to tell anybody, just because you're tired of getting unasked for advice, unsolicited advice. And a friend of mine who, she didn't have cancer, but she had a whole bunch of really serious things, and everybody wanted to tell her how to heal herself, including me. I was like, "Oh, well, have you tried this? Would you like to try that?" And this was many, many years ago. But then now, having been on the other end of that, the receiving end of it, oh my gosh, one thing I learned very strongly is don't offer unsolicited advice, because nobody wants it when they're going through it. It's such a personal thing. When you have a serious health issue, it's so personal to you, and you've got to navigate it yourself. It's I think we're all here on a learning journey, and everything that happens to us is all just for our benefit and to teach us. And so if we're supposed to learn from this, it's like you have to be able to navigate it on your own terms and have time to process the news when you get the diagnosis. So it's overwhelming. And so that was for me a big, big thing. And then to get sucked into the Western medical system. So my parents had to navigate this themselves. They had to do the way they wanted to. And my mom's way was, let's have a big Christmas in August. I don't think Daddy's going to make it to Christmas, so let's celebrate Christmas in August. So we went to Knoxville and had a huge Christmas thing in August. Then it's getting near real Christmas time in December, and we were going to go have a second Christmas with Dad because he was still doing great. And then suddenly my mom called and said, "Oh my gosh, he's in the hospital. He's not going to make it. Come quick. And we ended up rushing, and he ended up dying on December 20th.
Oh,
Um, and
wow.
interestingly, this is a little anecdote that your people might find interesting. So he suddenly he was at home and he suddenly had intense pain. My mom called the ambulance. They go to the hospital. They gave him Demerol or something, and he started hallucinating. And so my mom said, Daryl, where are you? And he said, I'm in Guadalcanal and I'm crawling through the jungle. And he was never in Guadalcanal. He was with Patton's forces in Europe. But he said, I'm in Guadalcanal and I'm crawling through the jungle. And then after he passed away, my mom found a story he had written when he was like 20 years old about an old guy who was just a few days away from turning 80, in which my dad was. He was going to turn 80 on January 6th. And that it was 5 days before Christmas, and he was dying, and he was hallucinating that he was crawling through Guadalcanal, and he wrote the whole story of his own death when he was 20 years old about
Oh
this.
my goodness.
Isn't that
Wow.
so? It was kind of an interesting.
That is mind blowing.
Yeah, it was pretty fascinating. And so he ended up so I get to the I, we got to the hospital in time. He hadn't passed over yet. And he my mom, had been glued to his side for many, many hours. So my two sisters convinced my mom that she should go change clothes. The doctor's like, he's going to probably last another 2 weeks, so go take a shower and change clothes. So my one sister took my mom and they left, and I stayed with my other sister. And as soon as my mom was, gone for like 20 minutes, that's when my dad chose to leave. And having worked in the hospice I used to be a volunteer in a hospice for a couple of years, and that's what often when partners have been married that long, 54 years, been married a long time, the one who is departing often can't find them a way to depart until their loved one goes away, and then they kind of have permission to leave. And so that's when he left. And then we had many encounters after he died. I felt like I almost got to know him better after he died because he visited me so many times afterwards, which was really, really wonderful and gave me some great advice, mainly through dreams. But then my next encounter with cancer was when the love of my life, my husband Jim, was diagnosed with prostate cancer in 2010. And he was only in his mid 50s. And they said, the doctor was like, "Oh, this could be very aggressive because you're very young," and blah blah blah, and told him all this scary stuff. So we researched it at the time, and there was a doctor in Austin. We were in Amarillo, Texas. There was a doctor in Austin, Texas, who had pioneered the Da Vinci robot. And they would go in, they could take out the prostate without a big invasive surgery. And everybody was praising it and saying, this is like a 1 week recovery versus an 8 week recovery, and so much less invasive and so much better. And we talked to the doctor in Austin, and he sounded like he really knew his stuff and was really interesting to talk to. And then the insurance wouldn't do it. They said, nope. Even though he was in our insurance group, he was everything. They just said no because he's in Austin. And he said, I'll charge less than if I did it in Amarillo. They said no, and they just adamantly said no, and it didn't matter why. So that was very frustrating. And we were about ready to go on a trip that had been planned before we got the diagnosis. And I was like, should we even go on the trip? And they said yes, because after a biopsy, you need time to heal before you can do anything anyway. So take the trip. And so we took our trip. And then while the trip was for me to go teach in Washington State at a healing clinic. And I was just going to teach because that's what I do. The healing clinic part of it didn't matter to me when I took the job. But then when we got there were testimonials all over the wall and thank you letters from people who had been healed of cancer. So then I was like, oh, this is kind of an interesting place. What's the deal here? What do you do? And her whole protocol, she did a liver cleanse. She would do a colon hydrotherapy and a raw diet. It was a raw food diet, and then they would, if you were doing a cancer treatment, they would go from raw to smoothies to liquid, and then do the liver cleanse. So we went through the whole protocol, which was a 10-day thing, and we went through it
What
together. I went.
was it? What was it called?
Um, I don't know that the 10-day protocol had a name. It was all really part of the liver cleanse. But
Hmm.
the woman who ran the place, it was called, and I think the place still exists. It's called the Annapurna Center for Self-Healing, and it's in Port Townsend, Washington. And so I was there to teach my course, and she gave us, like room and board while we were there, and supplied a room for me to teach in exchange for her to be able to take the course for free. That was the deal we had. So while we were there, when we read the testimonials, we decided after my course was over, it was a 3-day workshop, that we would stay and do this 10-day protocol. And she called it a liver cleanse, is what she called the protocol, was a liver cleanse. But it was really much more than that, because you would put hot packs with cod liver oil on your liver at night, and you would have apple cider vinegar with I think, yeah, I think it was apple cider vinegar with honey every morning, and a glass of that in the morning. This was to get things started. And your diet consisted first of salads, and then eventually smoothies, and then eventually juicing, and then eventually nothing except for the apple cider vinegar, the hot packs, and eventually you drank a bunch of warm, I want to say Epsom salt water that was about the saltiness of like if you were to have chicken broth, you know. And so it was quite an interesting thing. And then at the end, you end up pooping out all these little green stones out of your liver. A lot of green stones. It's pretty amazing. And I think I lost like 14 pounds in the 10 days. So it was a really interesting experience, and we were hoping maybe it would, turn his cancer around. So we got back home and we continued doing the raw diet. And I cleaned out the kitchen, got rid of all the plastics, got rid of our microwave. I just went radically onto getting rid of anything toxic. And we just really did a raw diet for 18 months. Meanwhile, the doctor that had diagnosed him, and in Amarillo at that time, in my opinion, it was a medical mafia. They had one urology place with all the urologists in Amarillo. And when you got into that system, they gave you your doctor. If you didn't like your doctor, well, too bad, you can drive 2 hours south and go to Lubbock. But if you want to be in Amarillo and get treated, you're going to take who we give you, which I found really disempowering, and it really made me angry. Um, and then, so now we're with this doctor who does not believe in anything natural at all. And so we said we want, before we have, since the insurance denied this prostatectomy that we wanted to do, then we're just going to take it slow, and we're going to decide what we want to do. And he was furious. And he had to go in for periodic checks. And so around Christmas time, we went in for a checkup, and it had been about a year that we had been doing this. And he's checks him, and then he starts screaming at him, saying, "Do you want to die? Do you want to leave your wife a widow? Do you want to leave your children with no father?" He just started screaming all this very scary stuff. And it was really hitting me in all my, I was terrified as it was that I was going to lose him. And then he just was pushing those buttons, and I started crying, and he's yelling at Jim. And so he sets up an appointment with the surgeon. Thankfully, the surgeon was super sweet and was very friendly towards natural alternatives. So when we go see the surgeon goes, "But this is not what you wanted to do. You didn't want to have this surgery. You guys wanted to try the natural way, right?" And we said, "Yeah, but this guy was really mean and forced us to come see you." And he said, "Okay, well, let's do this. Let's do another biopsy. It's been a year. Let's see if you're improved. If you're improved, from all the efforts you guys have been making, because we were drinking SEAC, we were doing everything. We were doing even colon hydrotherapy. We continued doing it, for a year after we got home. So he
Let
he
me
did it.
pause you right there.
Yeah.
Uh, can you please explain what SEAC is? I used to drink it. I don't drink it now, but that's a good thing that I've heard nothing but good things about. So
Yeah,
if you
we
could
were
share
trying to
about
drink
that.
it. And it's an herbal tea. It's an herbal concoction of teas, and I can't tell you what they are now. You could Google it though. It's spelled ESSIAC, SEAC. And I believe, and take this with a grain of salt, guys, because my memory's not that great, but I believe that it's like an ancient Native American recipe. And so it's these certain herbs that you can take and you drink them through this tea regularly, and it's supposed to help get you rid of cancer. And in addition to the Essiac tea, we were doing the raw diet, we were doing colon hydrotherapy regularly, and we were using meditation and hypnosis as well. So we felt like we were doing everything we possibly could to reverse the cancer. And we also really researched, like Louise Hay's work on connecting, she connected cancer to resentment, and sexual stuff could cause cancer in the sex organs. And of course, the prostate is essentially a sex organ. And my husband, before, he and I hadn't been married very long when all this started happening. We got married in 2005. So we'd been married 5 years, newlyweds still. And but he did have a history, not of sexual abuse, but he had a history of some pretty hard things with a bad marriage, that just where he went 10 years with no sex because, the marriage was so bad. So he felt like the resentment made sense to him to have that resentment in the prostate. I don't know, I don't know how, if this is okay to talk about on your show, but the connection between, illnesses and emotions. And if any of your listeners have ever listened to Dying to Be Me, Anita Morjani, who had, terrible, terrible cancer and then had a near-death experience. And she talks about cancer being an emotional disease, one thing she learned from the whole thing. And she became, if you've never heard of Dying to Be Me, her book, and her experience, she's all over. You can go onto YouTube and watch her talk about her experience. Anita Morjani, Moorjani. Anita, she is amazing. But if cancer is an emotional disease, he felt that it made sense that he would have prostate cancer because of the resentment that he did have for 10 years of never getting more than 3 feet closer, close to each other and being married to someone. And they were married for 25 years, but the last 10 years were really, really hard, really, really hard. So the situation then with this surgeon, he said, let's do another biopsy. And they let me be in there and watch both biopsies. I got to stay right there and watch them all. It was pretty fascinating, actually. But the biopsy came out
It's
exactly the same.
fascinating for you because you don't have to go through it.
Exactly. Exactly. My poor husband, he was not fun for him at all. But I was grateful that they let me be there. I didn't think they would let me be there, but they did. I got to stand shoulder to shoulder with the doctor while he did it. And the first biopsy was 12 samples, five of which were malignant. The second biopsy was 12 samples, five of which were malignant. So it was exactly the same. And nothing had improved, based on the biopsy. So by this time, Jim said, I feel as if I'm walking around with a time bomb ticking inside me, and I want to do something about it. So I said, okay, whatever you want to do. One thing that was also really interesting during the time that he was battling, and I think it really illustrates the the personal nature of having cancer. He was in the middle of the night. I woke up and he was thrashing around and groaning, and I knew he was having a bad dream. And so my initial impulse was wake him up. And then my inner voice that guides me said, "Don't wake him up. Don't wake him up. This is important. He needs to go through this." So I waited until he stopped thrashing and stopped groaning, and then woke him up and said, "What were you dreaming?" And he said, "I dreamt I was fighting with a black wolf." He said, "I was fighting with this wolf, and finally, I had to kill the wolf." And he said, and I finally killed the wolf, but I killed the wolf at the end out of kindness because the wolf was suffering and I had to put it out of its misery. So I killed the wolf. But at first it was a vicious fight to the death, right? And then I guess he wounded the wolf enough that he had to then shoot the wolf at the end. But he felt like it was definitely like a turning point in his healing journey, that he was kind of wrestling with this thing. And so he ended up doing, I'm trying to think of the name of it, where they put the little radioactive seeds in the prostate. Brachytherapy. I think it's called brachytherapy.
Mhm.
They ended up doing brachytherapy where the surgeon goes in and they have these little tiny radioactive seeds, and they have a whole little pattern, and they watch it on a computer, and they put them in this whole design throughout the prostate. And then since then he's been cancer free. And we did have a diagnosis of stage 4 rectal cancer in uh, October 30th of 2023. In 2023, he went in for a colonoscopy. And but I was shocked to realize this was his very first colonoscopy ever, and he was 70 years old. And I didn't realize he had never had one before. And what I didn't know was that when you've had prostate cancer, if you get treated with radiation, the prostate is right there on the other side of the rectal wall. And so it's frequent that people can get rectal cancer after having radiation in the prostate. And I had no idea. So they found this fist-sized black mass in his rectum, right there next to the prostate on the other side of the wall. And so when he was coming out of the anesthesia, right after, they brought him into recovery from the colonoscopy, and the doctor said to me, he has stage 4 rectal cancer. And I was just like, oh my gosh, I mean, it was just like hit me like a brick. And so we get home from the colonoscopy, and they're like, okay, we have to have surgery. They scheduled him for surgery to have that thing removed. And then we're like, what do we do? What do we do? What do we do? So I had been already studying Dr. Joel Furman, who has written a book, has written 14 books, 7 of which are bestsellers, New York Times #1 bestsellers. He became most famous for one called Eat to Live. And then his most recent one is called Eat for Life. But he has one, The End of Diabetes, The End of Heart Disease, The End of Dieting. A lot of his books start with The End of. And we found out that he had a retreat in San Diego, California, still there, called the Eat to Live Retreat. So as soon as we get this diagnosis, we called and we signed up to attend the Eat to Live retreat from January 1st through April 1st of 2024. So the first 3 months of 2024, we were in San Diego at the Eat to Live retreat. And it's wonderful to be in a place where you have chefs cooking for you. You've got people putting you through different exercise programs and swimming and walking and just relaxing. So the first 3 months of last year, that's what we did. And it was very expensive. And we didn't have the money. So we
I,
put it on
I assumed that. I was like, wow, that's got to be very pricey.
very pricey. And you know what we did? Mark, it was like, okay, we don't have the money for this. But how much is life and health worth? And so we decided to we spread it out over 3 credit cards. And we put the costs on credit cards, which is really a risky thing to do. But I thought, hey, if we get healthy, I'll find a way to pay those credit cards off. And believe it or not, I paid it off within a few months. And I mean, when I got back, a few months after I got back. And so like I think by October of last year, I had them paid off. But it was really so worth it. It was so worth it. And essentially the combination of diet and exercise and good sleep and the right supplements and things, we just felt so, I mean, we felt like we'd gained 20 years of life. And we came back feeling so amazing. And Jim lost 25 pounds, and Jim was slender when he got there. He did not need to lose weight. He lost 25 pounds that he's never gained back. And so he's so thin that people immediately assume he has cancer when they see him because he's very thin. But he doesn't have cancer, thankfully. And they did find when they did the surgery and took that mass out and they examined it, then they called to say, "Oh, sorry, we made a mistake. It is not malignant." And so that was a huge relief. But still, we were really glad that we had signed up for this and we did this program. And so if anybody's interested, there is one called The End of Cancer, I believe, and it's a wonderful, it's just a wonderful book. I'm in a way of life, and he has a great website that's not very expensive. It's like $10 a month, and it's got all kinds of recipes and all kinds of information and videos, and it's a ton of information for $10 a month. But anyway, so Jim is now doing great. He is cancer free. When we went back and had a follow-up colonoscopy, his thing had grown back on top of the scar tissue, and so they removed the second one, and then he went back 6 months later for a third one, and in the third one nothing has grown back, and there's no malignancy, and there's not even, they did biopsies and everything's fine. So now he's really truly clean, and And so, it's just been such a journey for us, and a journey of learning and a journey of faith and trust and, just kind of kind of trying to navigate health in this lifetime.
Would you say would be the biggest lesson that you've learned through all of this that you'd want to share?
Well, it's probably one that everybody's already figured out, which is just that this is a very personal journey, and you have to go it on your own and understand, through whatever means makes sense to you, whether it's through prayer or meditation or calling on spirit guides or whatever it is, or through research and reading what path feels right for you. Because even Bernie Siegel, I'm sure you've heard of Bernie Siegel, who what did he write, something, a food something and medicine. I can't remember what Bernie Siegel's name of his book was, but many years ago he would hold these cancer groups where he would talk to everybody, and it was like a support group. And he said, over the years of all these support groups, I saw people who would get cancer and die. I saw people who would have terrible diagnoses and survive and become cancer free. And he said, and what I learned was that it doesn't matter what path you choose. If you believe it's going to work, it will work. He said you could have the peanut butter and jelly sandwich diet as a cancer cure, and it will cure you if you really believe it's going to cure you. you know and that was his example. You could be on the peanut butter and jelly sandwich diet, which I thought was pretty funny. But and so, we just, one of the things too that I feel like we had to learn was you can't blame yourself. You can't get into a guilt trip. Like when we did this whole thing for 18 months and went, bent over backwards to try all these different modalities, and we're doing absolutely everything to reverse the prostate cancer, and it didn't get any better. It was frustrating. It was very demoralizing. And the tendency, I think, is to go, "Oh, I must not be doing something right. I must not have the right mental attitude. That must be what's wrong." I think that that's a common reaction, but I personally don't think that's a good place to go, because number one, it's not healthy. It's not going to help. But number two, I think that we're all here on this journey, and what I've learned about healing, and I've been through some miraculous healings on my own. I've gotten several death sentences from doctors that I benefited from healing from. But what I've learned myself is that sometimes you're meant to go through that journey of illness for all the gift of that you learn from it, the gift of learning to appreciate life, or the gift of learning to appreciate your loved ones, or whatever gifts and lessons it has for you. And some people they have a time that they're meant to go. And so they're not meant to heal. And then there's other times when it is your journey and you are meant to heal, and your healing has that ripple effect. I think whether you die or whether you heal, it has a ripple effect that affects so many people. In lessons in love and all sorts of things, lessons in faith and trust. But if it's not your time to be healed for whatever reason, I don't think that that's a reason to feel self-condemnation, or like you failed in some way that you're not healing. And that was a big lesson for me, was that when if you heal, great. If you don't heal, that doesn't mean you failed. It just means that you're on your journey. And so you don't have to take on the guilt and the shame and all that, feeling like I must not be thinking right, or I must not have the right attitude, or whatever. And that's always my tendency. Whenever, things would happen, I would be like, oh, must not be doing it right, must not be thinking right. So I think that's the biggest lesson for me personally, through all of this. Jim's
That's
outside.
beautiful.
I'd love to hear
That's
Jim's.
really great. So before we end this, I have one final question for you, and it's not related to what we've been talking about. You know, I'm all about helping to make the world a better place. And so I want to throw the question to you. How would you help make the world a better place for everyone?
Oh gosh, I'm going to be 68 this year, and I should be retired. I should have retired long ago. By at least my sister's retired at 62, and here I'm going still. I and what drives my passion to make the world a better place is that I really believe that we are all connected through consciousness. And so I work really, really hard teaching a methodology called controlled remote viewing because it allows people to explore the potential of their own minds and the fact that we are all connected and to get information like my dad prophesying his own death through, when he was 20 years old. Those types of things happening when I was a child. I also had a near death experience when I was 2. I died and they brought me back. And I feel that those types of things kind of open up portals in my own awareness that things are not just what they appear to be. Reality is not always what we think it is. And that there's a lot more to reality and to our existence than meets the eye. And so, my way of making the world a better place is to share love through the expansion of consciousness by teaching controlled remote viewing, extended remote viewing, associative remote viewing, types of remote viewing that I teach through my website, intuitivespecialists.com. And I feel that's a huge thing because as we reach our own potential, we get filled with more love and compassion for our fellow humans as we experience things that have no explanation, that as we expand beyond the limits of what we think of as time and space. And then it gives us greater compassion. And of course, through greater compassion, then hopefully we can make the world a better place, even though right now things are kind of upside down and really lots of change happening as you and I are meeting. It's what is it? It's February of 2025, really tumultuous time in our country and all around the world. So I just love the idea of sharing love and compassion in a time when some of that's getting hard to find, among certain populations or certain groups. Excuse me. So that's how I do through my business and through my teaching. That's how I strive to make the world a better place personally.
Well, beautiful answer. Lori, thank you so much for sharing your journeys and your husband's journey and your father's journey with us. And it's been an honor and a pleasure. Thank you so much from the bottom of my heart.
Thank you,
Uh,
Mark.
and I'd like to thank each and every one of you out there for joining us here at To Be Your Own Hero. And please like, subscribe, make a comment in the comment section. And most importantly, hopefully that you've learned something here. I sure have. It's been a lot of fun, and it's always a journey with people to learn about their stories because everybody's story is so important, and everybody has something to share. And make the most out of this beautiful thing that we've been gifted with called life. Every day is our own personal journeys, and the most precious commodity that we have on this earth is time. Once time is gone, it's gone. You can't get it back. And each and every person on earth has the same 24 hours. And it's just a matter of what each and every one of us does with it. But make the most out of every single day, every single hour, every single minute, as well as every single second. And until next week, I hope everybody is very blessed and have a great, great week. And we will see you next week on To Be Your Own Hero. Thank you very much.